The smell of old leather still haunts me. Every morning when I wake up in this 2006 Honda Civic, that's the first thing that hits me. Not the ache in my bones from sleeping curled up like a pretzel, not the cold seeping through the windows, just that smell of Harold's old briefcase mixed with the cherry air freshener that stopped working 3 months ago. 62 years of marriage, and this is what I got: four wheels, a half empty gas tank, and the memory of a man who loved God more than he ever loved me. The irony tastes bitter in my mouth every single morning. Harold spent our entire life together, preaching about earthly possessions being temporary. Money is the root of all evil, Margaret, he'd say, counting his collection plate donations with the precision of a bank teller. We must give everything to the Lord. Well, he did exactly that. Every last penny, $730,000, gone. Handed over to First Baptist Church of Millfield like I was nothing more than a footnote in his grand gesture of faith. The lawyer read that will with the enthusiasm of someone ordering coffee. To my beloved wife, Margaret, I leave my 2006 Honda Civic that she may have transportation in her remaining years. Remaining years. Like I was a dog he was making sure had food and water before he died. The house we built together in 1978, the church. Our savings account that took 4 decades to build, the church. The small CD account I didn't even know existed, the church. Even his collection of vintage fishing rods worth maybe $2,000, the church. But Harold wasn't always this devout. When we first met in 1960, he was a mechanic with grease under his fingernails and a laugh that could fill a room. He'd take me dancing every Friday night at the Riverside Ballroom, spinning me around until my feet hurt and my cheeks ached from smiling. We'd spend Sundays sleeping in, making pancakes and reading the paper in bed. God wasn't even a whisper in our conversations back then. The change started slowly, like cancer. First, it was just Sunday mornings. Harold said he wanted to try church, said his mother would roll over in her grave knowing he never went. I didn't mind. I actually liked the hymns, the sense of community. The potluck dinners weren't terrible either. But then Sunday morning became Sunday evening services too. Then Wednesday night Bible study. Then Saturday morning men's fellowship. Before I knew it, Harold was at that church more than he was home. And with every passing year, more of our money found its way into that collection plate. God provides, Margaret, he'd say when I questioned the increasing donations. We have to have faith. Faith. That word became Harold's answer to everything. Faith when I worried about retirement. Faith when our old car broke down and we couldn't afford the repairs. Faith when the doctor said my arthritis would only get worse and maybe we should think about a smaller place, something more manageable. God will provide, Harold would pat my hand dismissively. We just need to trust his plan. I started keeping my own small stash of cash hidden in an old coffee can in the basement. $20 here, $50 there. Nothing Harold would miss, but enough to maybe buy groceries when he gave our food money to the church building fund. I felt guilty about it at first, but guilt has a way of fading when you're choosing between tithing and eating. Don't get me wrong, I believe in God. I always have. But I also believe God gave us brains to take care of ourselves and the people we love. Harold seemed to think God wanted him to give away everything we'd worked for, leaving me to figure out the rest. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was watching Harold become a stranger. The man who used to hold my hand during movies started sitting 3 feet away from me in church pews, hands folded in prayer. The man who used to tell me I looked beautiful every morning started looking right through me, like I was furniture he'd grown tired of noticing. The man who used to ask about my day started talking only about scripture and sermons and what Pastor Williams said about sacrifice. I became the sacrifice, not to God, but to Harold's vision of what a godly man should be. I don't know who needs to hear this, but if you're still here, maybe you understand what I'm talking about. Most people think marriage is about love, but after 60 years, I can tell you it's about choice. Every single day you choose each other, or you choose something else. Harold chose the church. Subscribe if you want to hear the rest. The final years were the hardest. Harold's health started failing around 2018. His knees gave out first, then his heart started acting up. I became his caretaker, driving him to doctor appointments, managing his medications, helping him in and out of the shower. The man who'd spent years barely acknowledging my existence suddenly needed me for everything. But even then, even when he could barely walk to the mailbox, he kept writing checks to the church, bigger checks. I won't need this money where I'm going, he'd wheeze, signing over another $5,000 to the building fund. But the church will do God's work long after I'm gone. I wanted to scream at him. What about me, Harold? What about the woman who's been by your side for 6 decades? What about the woman who's wiping your face and cooking your meals and listening to you mumble prayers in your sleep? Don't I deserve some security? Don't I deserve to know I'll have a roof over my head when you're gone? But I never said those words, not once. I just kept taking care of him, kept driving him to church on Sundays, even when my own arthritis made gripping the steering wheel agony. I kept smiling and nodding when Pastor Williams would praise Harold's generosity in front of the whole congregation, calling him a true servant of the Lord. I kept pretending everything was fine while I watched our future disappear into collection plates and building funds. Harold died on a Tuesday morning in March. I found him in his favorite chair, the one facing the window where he could see the church steeple in the distance. His last words to me, spoken the night before, were about making sure Pastor Williams got the key to our safety deposit box. Not, I love you. Not, thank you for everything. Instructions about a key. The funeral was beautiful, I'll give the church that. Standing room only, with Harold being eulogized as a pillar of the community, a man who understood true sacrifice. I sat in the front row wearing my only black dress, the same one I'd worn to my mother's funeral 15 years earlier, listening to people talk about my husband like he was a saint. After the service, Pastor Williams pulled me aside. Margaret, he said, his voice dripping with practiced compassion, Harold was very specific about his final wishes. He wanted you to know that the Honda is in good condition. He had it serviced just last month. The Honda, like it was a consolation prize. I remember someone once telling me there are rules that change after 60. One of them says that sacrifice without boundaries isn't love, it's self-destruction. I wish I'd known that 30 years ago. Harold's sacrifice wasn't noble, it was selfish. He gave away our security to buy himself a reputation as a godly man, and he left me holding the consequences. If you want to know what those rules are, it's in the description. The first month after Harold died, I tried to make it work. I applied for Social Security survivor benefits, which gave me about $800 a month. I looked into senior housing, but the waiting lists were years long, and the places I could afford immediately looked like prisons. I tried to stay in our house, but the mortgage payment alone was $1,200 a month. Harold had assumed the church would somehow take care of me after he died. He'd never actually asked them to, mind you. He just assumed his decades of generosity would create some unspoken obligation. It didn't. Pastor Williams expressed his sympathy, of course. The church ladies brought me casseroles for a few weeks. But when I finally worked up the courage to ask if there was any kind of assistance program for members in need, the answer was polite but clear. We'll keep you in our prayers, Margaret. Prayers don't pay mortgages. I lost the house 4 months after Harold died. 43 years of memories packed into boxes and sold at an estate sale that raised just enough money to pay the remaining debts. I kept what fit in the Honda: some clothes, a few photographs, Harold's old briefcase that still smelled like him, and a coffee can with $312, my life savings. The first night I slept in the car was behind a Walmart in the next town over. I'd driven there because I was too ashamed to stay in Millfield, too afraid someone from church would see me and realize how completely Harold's grand gesture of faith had destroyed my life. I reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go and tried to pretend this was just temporary, just until I figured something out. That was 8 months ago. I've gotten good at this life, if you can call it good. I know which Walmarts let you park overnight without hassle. I know which gas stations have the cleanest restrooms and which McDonald's will let you sit for hours with just a cup of coffee. I've learned to sleep sitting up, to bathe with baby wipes and dry shampoo, to make a sleeve of crackers last 2 days. I've become invisible in all the ways that matter. The worst part isn't the physical discomfort, it's the isolation. When you don't have an address, you don't exist. You can't get a library card. You can't apply for most jobs. You can't even fill out forms for assistance programs because they all want proof of residence. I'm a ghost haunting the edges of a life I used to have. Sometimes I drive past our old house. The new owners have painted it yellow and planted roses in the front yard. It looks happy in a way it never did when Harold and I lived there. I wonder if they know about the woman who spent 60 years making that house a home, who scrubbed those floors and painted those walls and hung curtains in every window. Probably not. I'm just a story the realtor might have mentioned in passing. The church is thriving, by the way. They've started construction on a new fellowship hall, thanks in part to Harold's generous donation. I drove by last week and saw Pastor Williams breaking ground with a shiny new shovel, surrounded by smiling congregants. There's probably a plaque somewhere with Harold's name on it, a permanent reminder of his sacrifice. No one mentions the woman living in her car because of that same sacrifice. I've had a lot of time to think these past 8 months about marriage, about faith, about the difference between generosity and cruelty. Harold thought he was being righteous, giving everything to the church. But righteousness that leaves your spouse homeless isn't righteousness at all. It's selfishness disguised as virtue. Everything I learned about sacrifice, about trust, about what really matters after 60, it's all in something called the 60-year rule. 9 rules that explain exactly why everything I believed was wrong after 60. It changed how I see my family, my faith, my future, everything. I wish someone had given me this 20 years ago. Check the description. Winter's coming and I'm scared. The Honda's heater doesn't work properly, and I can't afford to get it fixed. I've been looking into shelters, but most of them are full, and the ones with space have waiting lists longer than my arm. I keep thinking about Harold, about whether he'd be proud of what his faith has cost me. I think he would be. I think he'd see my suffering as proof of his righteousness, evidence that he chose God over worldly concerns. He'd probably tell me to have faith that God will provide. But God hasn't provided. The church hasn't provided. The community that praised Harold's generosity has forgotten the widow he left behind. I'm providing for myself now, one day at a time, one parking lot at a time. I'm 88 years old, and I'm learning that the only person you can really count on is yourself. That's a hard lesson to learn this late in life, but it's true. Marriage should be a partnership, but mine was a dictatorship disguised as devotion. Harold made decisions about our money, our future, our security without ever really considering what it would mean for me. He assumed I'd be taken care of because that's what he wanted to believe. He never asked what I wanted or needed. He just decided. The smell of old leather is fading now. The briefcase has been in the trunk for months, and I don't open it anymore. But sometimes when the wind is just right and the car gets warm enough, I catch a hint of it. It doesn't make me sad anymore. It reminds me of everything I survived. 62 years of being invisible, of having my needs treated as secondary, of watching my security disappear into collection plates. I survived Harold's version of love, and I'm surviving what came after. If you're still listening to this old woman's story, maybe you understand something about sacrifice that took me 88 years to learn. Real love doesn't leave you homeless. Real faith doesn't ignore the people right in front of you. And real generosity considers the cost to everyone involved, not just the giver. The keys on my table aren't just car keys anymore. They're the keys to whatever comes next. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I know it won't include pretending that Harold's choices were noble. They weren't. They were the choices of a man who loved the idea of being godly more than he loved his wife. I'm still here, still figuring it out, still sleeping in the car he left me. But I'm not the same woman who watched helplessly as her husband gave away their future. I'm the woman who survived it. And sometimes that has to be enough.